Hello, and this is the in-class exercise for Module 2 in MGD 102. And the objective here, pardon the hat, it was a cold winter day recording this. This isn't this isn't my look and style. This is just me trying to stay warm. The objective of this class is to learn a few more commonly used tools in Photoshop and expose you to those for the very first time. And some of those tools are going to include the clipping path tool, the type tool, and layer styles, and the clone tool. We'll also learn a little bit about print resolution. So we have a magazine cover. When we're dealing with magazines, we now have a professional printing 4-color process. Usually that's done in what's called CMYK, cyan, yellow, magenta, and key. Key is another word for black. And those little dots all put together at high resolution is what creates what we see on pages. We're also going to talk about trim and bleeds. You'll notice that on some magazines or books or advertisements, the images go all the way off the edge of the page. Well, there isn't a printer that can actually print to the edge of the paper and stop. So what they do is they print just a little bit more than what they need on an oversized piece of paper, and then later there's a machine with a die cut that trims that, and it'll take just a little bit of that image off. We call that the trim or bleed. So in this exercise you'll get to work with that a little bit as well. So we're trying to combine all of those things. Might seem like a big project, and really it's not. This is pretty simple stuff. Some of it can be a little tedious, but you'll see in this video that we can actually get through this whole process in not very much time. All right, so let's jump to it. If you're in D2L, there's one document that you're going to need ahead of time, and at the time I recorded this video, it was called French Bulldog. It should be in your D2L module content. So you'll want to go ahead, pause your video, and download that file and have it ready to go. All right, assuming you've got that file ready to go, we're going to come into Photoshop. We're going to create a new document. You should have this window in front of you. I'm going to go ahead and give this project a name. In this case, it's going to be MGD 102. This is the file convention that we're trying to use, and we'll just do magazine cover underscore Swanson. Put your last name or your nickname, something that lets us know who you are, and then the date. In this case, we'll just do, it was February of 2016. That's close enough. So that's a good file name for your Photoshop document. Next, we're going to change width and height. And actually, it's better to change the resolution first because things can get out of order. So let's change resolution to 300. Generally in the print world, 300 is a good resolution for most print projects. A lot of professional printers print at 100 or 133 line screen, and to cover that with resolution, usually you need at least twice whatever the line screen is in resolution. So 300 is more than what we need, and that's good. It's okay to have a little more resolution than to have too little. And do you need to go to 600? No, you don't need to. You'll just needlessly have a large file size. The printer can only print so well, so you might as well work with a rather optimal file size. If you work with something too big, it can start slowing your computer down, or if you're needing to send files, it can needlessly send way too big of files. So 300 is a good number. If you're working with a printer, you want to check that. They might tell you you need something higher. So it's always good to get the print specs before you begin the project. Now in this case, we're gonna choose a magazine document that's 8 inches by 10 7/8. A lot of times magazines print, they work in eighths and sometimes even 16ths. So you have to be good at converting your math from fractions into decimals. So that would normally be a width of 8 inches by 10.875. However, the print specs also say that we need to add 1/8 of an inch for trim and bleed. So I actually need to add, I need to change this to inches, sorry. let me do that again. So this should be 8 inches by 10.875. Make sure your units are inches. I had mine set to pixels. And the resolution's at 300. And we want to make sure that it's CMY color. Most printers print in 4-color process, which is also called CMYK. So when you hear process color, 4-color process, CMYK, those are synonymous pretty much. And now back to the trim. We need to add 1/8 of an inch to every side. So my width, since I have 2 sides to account for 1/8 of an inch, that's 1/4 of an inch. So 1/8 plus 1/8 is 1/4 inch. So I'm going to need to add 1/4 inch total to my width. I'm also going to need to add 1/4 inch to my height. Now I specifically made this 10.875, so you have to do a little bit of complicated math here. And if you're good with your math, this should come out to 11.125, okay? So sometimes you're just going to have to figure that out. A little bit of math all on your own. They're not necessarily always going to tell you. They're going to say add that much to get, so this is to try to get a total size. It'll trim down to 8 by 10 7/8, but we need to give it extra information so it can have, it can cut that stuff off. We're gonna use working CMYK US web coded swap. That's a pretty good standard. If the only time you'd ever change that is if you knew to change it, and a lot of times you'll get that in the print specs. So that'd be something you would want to double check to make sure that your printer is using that. Almost all magazines are using US web coded swap. Okay. And that looks good. That's our document setup. The background, we're going to be changing the background, so it doesn't really matter what this is set to right now. So let's go ahead and hit OK. And here is our document. Now, just out of good habit, I'm going to go ahead and save this to my desktop or my project folder so that I can constantly save as I'm working. That's a good habit to get into. There will be a day that you forget to do that, and your computer will either get stuck or a power outage or something like that, and then you're in big trouble. Okay, so here we have our working document. Now before I get, eventually I'm going to want to bring an image into this magazine document. So I need to edit an image before I bring it into this document, which is a common process in graphic design. The image that I need to open is going to be the French Bulldog. So if you don't have that already, you should have that downloaded. And we're going to go ahead and open it. And there's our little friend. Okay? Now one of the things I want to do is I want to bring that into my magazine document, but I don't want the background. Now in this case, this background is all white. That makes it a lot easier to select just the dog. If I bring it over right now the way it is, I'm going to get the dog and the white background. And eventually I want to make this like a blue background. This background is going to be some kind of blue, and I want my dog on top of it without white. So it doesn't work to just bring it over. I need to be able to select and clip just the dog. Alright, so I'm going to introduce you to a thing called paths. In your window area, you can go to something called paths if you don't have it already open. Now I've already created a path, but I'm going to show you how to create a new one. I better close my video because I can't access. I need to be able to grab, oh come on. I'm going to have my little video window in the way, so I'm going to narrow my Photoshop document just a bit so I can access these buttons. There we go. Alright, so I have the path tool open on the windows. And again, window paths if you need to get to it, if you don't have it already here docked in your Windows palette. And all I have to do is click New. Down at the bottom there's this square with a cropped earmark bottom, and if you hover over it you get the title Create a New Path. I'll go ahead and do that. And then zooming in, Command plus lets me zoom in. I can start anywhere near the edge, and I like to go in pretty close. Remember, the space bar changes your mouse to a hand and it lets you move your document around. That comes in handy as you're working on this. And we can pretty much just start anywhere. And there's a tool here called the pen tool. You can also hit the keyboard Command P and it switches you to the pen tool. And all I'm going to do is just add little itty bitty anchor points along the edge of the dog. Now you'll notice that as I click them, each one of these are pretty straight. If I want to curve them a little bit, I can click, drag, and pull a little bit to get these anchor handles. I'm not expecting you to do that. If you know how to use anchor handles, maybe you've got some experience with Illustrator, it lets you curve these just a little bit so your path isn't just a bunch of little itty bitty straight lines. And bit by bit you go around the entire dog. So now in the back of your head you might say, wow, really? This is pretty tedious. Couldn't I just select the white, clip the dog out, and be done with it? You can. But the point of this exercise is to show you the options for selection. Okay, if we always just did selection with the magic wand tool or the quick select tool, then you've got a limited ability on using Photoshop. The other thing is sometimes you don't save those selections, so the next time you have to use this image for something else, you may have not saved that selection, and then you'd have to do it all over. By creating a path, I can actually save it in my JPEG file so it's there every time I want to use it. Now I'm just getting kind of close to where the selection is. Certainly selecting things that have fuzzy edges, especially with hair or fur, is always a trick. It's a very tough process to select images out of their backgrounds that have rather messy hair or a lot of fuzzy fur. And that just really takes a good designer to be able to have the discipline and the know-how to do selection of hair. We're just going to get close so that it looks decently good and you get the idea of how this tool works. All right? And you just keep on going, you keep on going. How many points do you need? It really kind of just depends. Now here's a tough one where I have a piece of hair. If I want to keep that hair in there, I will go ahead and create a this is a whisker, and I might have to zoom in even more. This is a whisker that I may want to save. And you can see that this is very, very detailed. But it might be good to be able to keep and save that one whisker. All right. I'm not going to keep going. You can go ahead and do that on your own. When you get to the end, I can show you what this looks like. I'm going to cheat here, and I'm going to go across my dog. And then when you get back to where you started, you'll notice that when you meet with your very first anchor point, you get a tiny little circle next to your pen. That lets you know that you're going to close the path. And it just goes like that. And now if you look over your layers, you should be able to see that it's now selected. It's also possible on the same path layer to create a cavity inside. So maybe you have a person with their arm on their hip, and so there's a cavity between their arm and their body, and all you need to do is add that as another clip, and it'll keep that as a separate path inside of a path. So this is a way of sort of creating a cavity or a hole in that image. Now I've already done a path, So I'm going to actually delete this one that I've done, and this is a path that I've already done ahead of time, and you'll see that I've got the path all around the bulldog. And since I like that, I'm going to go ahead and save that JPEG, and now this clipping path is saved to that file. So next time I open up my JPEG, I already have the path and I can use it again, which is really, really handy. It's now time to bring this image into our magazine document. So we're going to change window to tile vertically so I can see the two side by side. On my bulldog, remember I just click on these tabs to go in between the two documents. So still on the French bulldog image, I can come to my paths, and down at the bottom there's a circle that says load path as a selection. There are other tools here where you can do it, have other options as a mask. Some people like to do that. For this exercise, I'm just going to change everything to a selection. So you just click that little button and your working path is now little marching ants. Now if I bring this over, we can go over to select, and I can choose modify feather. And I can change this to a different pixel, so it depends on how fuzzy it is. If I just clipped it with 0 feathering, then it's going to look like somebody took a scissors to the image and made a really, really crisp cut. But if I add just a little bit of feathering, 2 or 3 pixels, I mean, you can play around with it and find what you like. I can then bring that over. I just used the move tool. Let me show you that. Once I have the little marching ants, the selection, I choose my move tool, and as I hover over my clip, you should see the little scissors by your mouse arrow. And I just click, drag, and I bring that over to my magazine document and let it go. And there we go. And I can now move it around. Once I'm on this document and I switch back to the layers view, it gets placed on a layer above the background. That's exactly what I wanted. Now I'm going to do another little trick. Your instructor may not want you to do this, but I'm going to deselect so I don't have the marching ants anymore. One thing that happened here is I actually clipped out some of the whiskers, and I also clipped out the shadowing that was around the feet. If you look at the original image, there's a little bit of shadowing. So to get that back in, I'm going to do a little trick here. I'm going to change my bulldog image to grayscale. I don't have to go grayscale. Let's just leave it as it is. I'm going to bring that image over again without the selection. And now after I do that, I can close it. I don't need it anymore. And then I'm going to change that layer to multiply, and then drag the layer below the original image. And then I'm going to need to move it so that it lines up, and I might have to use my arrow keys to get it right on, to get it close to where we had it. That looks pretty good. And then I can even drop a little bit of opacity if I need to, if I think it's still a little dark around the edges. And then that way I keep some of the drop shadow. Now there's a little bit of a glow all the way around the dog. If I wanted to, I could take out some of that edge with just a touch up on my eraser. So I would change my eraser from a block to a brush, and maybe with a slightly smaller brush size I could go in and clean up that whole edge all the way around. So there's a little extra dog here, and this clipping path I did is probably, I could have maybe done a little bit more feathering than what I did. Again, clipping out an object with hair is a little tougher than something that has a crisp edge. So you get the idea on how I could clean up this edge just a little bit. And your instructor might even have a better way, might have some tricks that they know that works even better and saves more time. And there are more advanced ways to do a lot of these things, and you just have to decide what works for you. And if you didn't like how it clipped, you may have to do it over with a different feathering. So I'm going to pause the video, clean that up a little. Okay, I'm back and I've cleaned up all those edges. You can do that on your own time. I didn't want to waste all your time, so I did it really quick. Now the quality of how well you clip this is all going to be a function of how well you did your clipping path and other things as well, and it's also going to depend upon the contrast of your background. So in this case, I'm still seeing a little bit of too crisp of an edge, and so I might have to do some band-aid stuff to try to not make it look so artificial. Always the goal is to make things look natural. I do like that it brought in the shadowing around the feet a little bit, and I got a little bit better of a whisker. So I'm not entirely unhappy with it, but I now have my color dog and sort of a multiply background. And I can name these. This is going to be French Bulldog. And then this can be the French Bulldog background or some kind of name. I like to get in the habit of naming my layers so that I can keep track of it. I'm going to do one other little trick. Right now everything's looking a little pale to me. And this is just how the image came, but I can do a little bit to enhance the color. I'm going to come up here to Image, Adjustments, Curves. Now you don't want to overuse this tool because it can start pixelating your image, but I'm just going to see what Photoshop suggests by hitting Auto, and there you go. My dog got a little bit more color, which I like. It seems like it's got more variance. This is before and this is after. I mean, you do that to your own preference. I prefer more color coming out. It creates more contrast. And this is a very simple design principle where I have a background color of blue working with a foreground color of a lot of orange. Okay, so this is what we call warms and cools, and it can really make for nice design. It's an element of contrast as far as a principle goes. And we like oranges and blues because they're cold and they're warm, and those are just really, really good complements to each other. Okay, so I've got the dog, I've got my background, I've been saving as I go, and now I'm going to do a few things with the background just to sort of band-aid this clip. All right, I'm feeling that things are a little unnatural right now. So to try to help this give some better dimension, I'm going to do a few background tricks. So I'm going to create a layer just above my background. It's a new layer. I'm going to change my color palette to white. So from black all the way to white. And make sure I'm working in CMYK color sliders. And then I'll choose my brush tool, which acts like a big airbrush. Right now I'm going to make sure I have the airbrush spray tool. And if I go over my document, I see a circle that tells me how big it is. That's not nearly big enough. So I'm going to go pretty big on this one. And 2120, that looks pretty good. And all I want to do, maybe a little bigger, 2400. I just want to hit one quick spot of airbrush with white. So watch what this does. Here I've got it right about in the middle, and make sure that I have 100% opacity, 100% flow on my airbrush, and I just hit a quick hit of white. And that did quite a bit to add just a little dimension. If I want a little more, I could hit a few more spots. That doesn't look too bad. And just like that, we've added a little bit of dimension to our background. Really, really simple and effective. And at the same time, it's starting to hide my clipping path thing. Now I can do a few more things that can be kind of fun and neat. Let me just name this white spray. And then I'll create another layer. Now I'm going to change my brush tool to a pencil tool, and we'll choose a size of about, let's go 500. 500 is good. And I'll just hit a circle of white here. Now that's obviously it gets way too much attention. People are going to go, what's this white dot about? So I'm going to drop the opacity down to about 8%. So you could just barely see it now. And we'll call this white transparent circle. And if I have the move tool selected, while hovering over and having this layer selected, I can click and hold the option button, and then I see a black with a white arrow that lets me know I'm going to create a copy of whatever's on that layer. So I just click, drag, and it makes a copy. All of these layers can be transformed with Command T, or you can go to Edit, Free Transform. So there's my circle. Holding the Shift key keeps the aspect ratio. I can make that one bigger, hit Return. And I'm just going to create a couple of these circles, bring it around in the background. Some of them I'm going to have go off the edge of the page. I'll vary the size a little bit. And where they go doesn't matter. I want to have a few of them overlap so that I get this overlapping transparency just a little bit. And I don't want to do too many of these, but I want just enough to make this look a little interesting. And if I vary the size, that adds some contrast and variation to those circles. And that's probably all I need to do. So there are tiny little circles that you can see in the background. They're purely decorative. And for me, I'll have to admit that they were sort of little band-aids, because my clipping path, I had a hard time with the dog, so maybe I want to sort of disguise that a little bit. And now with this background, I can take all of these effects that I did and turn off the view. That's what it was before, and now I add them all back in, and I think it does a better job to add just a little bit of dimension to my background. All right? Simple little effect that you can do with background, and that really only took me 5, barely even 10 minutes to do. Looking pretty good. I'm liking it. French Bulldogs are pretty fun to look at. For the magazine cover, I'm really hamming up the dog because it's such a great looking dog. All right, next part is a title. For my title, I want that to be beneath the dog image because I want the title to go behind the clipped image. So I'll select the image just below the bulldogs, and then I come over here to my type tool, and I can start typing a title. Now at first I get, as soon as I have my type tool, I get the properties up at the top. I'm going to go ahead and choose a different font. I don't know what you have on your computer, but you want to find something. I want something with a fairly decent bold font. Thin fonts are good for things that look like Cosmopolitan or cosmetic kind of magazines. This is a fun magazine, so I'm looking for a thicker font that is going to be kind of fun. Here's a Gil Sans Ultra Bold. Let's try that. And I'll change the size to 72. And that's probably still not going to be big enough, but I can change that later. We'll go ahead and keep this on smooth. And then I'm going to use a white text. And all capital letters for me, I'll do puppy. Ooh, actually, I don't like that font. Let's choose something a little better. Future condensed, that's not too bad. No. I should have had this picked before I did. No, not Comic Sans. Your instructor probably will never let you use Comic Sans. All right, this Charter Black isn't bad. Let's work with this, and you can find one that you like. But I like that it's mostly a bold font, and that's usually when you see black. Black is one step further than bold as far as getting it to be a bigger font. So let's choose that. And I might need to move it around just a little bit. There's a guideline that lets me know it's centered. But then I'm going to free transform this again, Command T. And now I can change the size and everything that we have for the magazine. Now, one thing that I didn't do ahead of time that we should have done before I even got to this stage is I have this trim, remember? I was like, oh yeah, I have to add the trim. So in your document, I want to make sure that this title doesn't go off the edge of the paper. So we want to add a guideline to help me remember where our trim is. So up here we have a ruler. If you don't have a ruler showing, you can go to View and choose Rulers, and then it should be clicked. Right now it's off. Now I can go back to Rulers, and the shortcut is Command R. If you right click on the ruler, right now mine's set to pixels. If you right click, you can change it to inches or make sure that you're at inches. So now I need to come up to the, I gotta zoom way in, and I'm gonna go to the very top corner. And I need to add these guidelines. So if I click and hold the ruler, I drag down a guideline, and then I can line it up with the markers that I can see in the ruler. Right here I've got it at 0.29 inches. That's pretty close. I might not be able to perfectly get 0.125. And once I'm there, I can let it go. And that's a guideline. And if I hover over it, I can still move it. I'll create another one. This time I click from the left side and drag it over and line it up with 0.125. All right, simple as that. Let's go down to the bottom corner of our document. We're going to grab from the top and once again put it at the 1.125 and the 0.125. Just like that. I can even come up here to View and lock the guides. So now when I hover over them, I can't accidentally grab them and move them. Let's zoom out. So this now lets me know where the page is going to get cut. So I don't want to have any of my title be cut off. With titles I can get close. Generally speaking, you want to keep important content at least a ½ inch away from where it's going to get trimmed. That's called the live space. Now you can go into that ½ inch if you really know what you're doing. Some magazines, they're like, keeping everything ½ inch is too much. And they might go a little bit closer, but you certainly wouldn't want something right at the edge where it's getting cut off. That's why we add these guides for the live space and the trim. All right, let's keep moving. So I've got this title. Now I've done a white text on a light blue background. Now I would say the contrast isn't too bad. I think I can read the word puppy pretty well. I may not have to do anything. But if I didn't think I had enough contrast, one thing that can help with light text on a light background is to add a drop shadow to the text. So I'm going to show you a filter or it's actually a layer style. We come up with the puppy layer selected. We'll come over here to layer, layer style, and then Photoshop has this option called drop shadow. Now I could create my own manual drop shadow, and maybe your instructor will show you how to do that, but this can save a little bit of time and it keeps it consistent across your entire document. As soon as you click that, mine is set to preview ahead of time, but if yours isn't, you can just check this checkbox so you can see what it's going to look like before you commit the drop shadow. So now with the drop shadow, you've got a couple of options here. Usually the blend mode is set to multiply. I would suggest keeping that. But if you think this is maybe a little too dark, you can drop back how dark the drop shadow is. I think it was a little dark, so I'm going to bring this back to about 15%. All right, and then you can decide how wide it is, how far away from the letters it is. I think this one was set at about 12 or 13, which is good. And then you can decide how fuzzy it is. So it can be real crisp drop shadow to like you can't even tell it's a drop shadow anymore. So you play with these till you get to some place that you like. And I'll set mine at 16. And there isn't any absolute rule on what this needs to be. You just set those to your liking. And then you hit OK. So there is the puppy with just a slight drop shadow. I didn't want to have it too much, but I think it helps add contrast between the light text on a colored background. And if I look over here in my layers, you can see that it's added the effects to my layer information. And I can even click this eye. Here's to see what it looks like without, and here's what it looks like with it. I think it looks better with it, so I'm going to keep it. I think it adds to the dimension. So this is starting to look like a magazine. The next part I want to do is create sort of a title. So I'm going to create a copy of this title and drag it down. And then I need this in front of my dogs. So I'm going to click this layer and move it in front of the dogs. And to get a lot of contrast, I'm going to choose a cyan, maybe quite a bit. This is kind of a fun, playful type of magazine. And so this has a lot of pop to it, high contrast. It's a little big right now, so I can size this down. And then I can edit it by going back to the type tool. This first one is going to be meat, this time not all caps. And I'll create a copy of that one. And this one will be meat chalk. Now you can choose what kind of alignment you like. You might like right alignment, you might like left alignment. For me, I'm going to bring the size of the word meat down just a hair, just to add a little contrast. So there's contrast and repetition at the same time here. And I can move those, if I have both layers selected, I can move them around to where I might like it. And so far I've been using one font. So now I'm going to add a little caption, and this can go above the chuck. It doesn't really matter as long as it's in front of the dog. And I'll add another text there. This time I'm going to just go with a simple Arial. And I think I've got Arial narrow bold. Arial narrow bold will be good. For light text, that's usually a good idea. I'll drop the font size down to 18 points. And we'll start to write a caption. I'm going to change alignment to left. The 2016 Dog Show champ at the San Diego Dog Show. Whether it has a period or not, that's your choosing. Now, in the window area, I can choose character. This opens up all your character formats. You have some at the top, but one of them that's missing is leading. So if I have all my text selected, I can change the leading. Right now it's 18 point. If you have auto here, I highly suggest you change it from auto to something that you like. Quite often it can look good to have the font and the leading match. You just have to look at your descenders. If you have descenders running into your capital letters, oops, I can't do that. And now I just erased it all. Let me put that back in. Actually, I'll go to history. Well, meet Chuck, the 2016 champ at the San Diego Dog Show. If I have my cursor in there, I can hit Command A to select all my text. Let's go ahead and change that color so I can see it better. There we go, that's better. And maybe the bold is too much. I'll bring it down to regular. And then with everything selected, it looks like my descender is not running into my capital letters. I think I'm okay here. I'll zoom out. With the move tool, I can move this text, keeping things aligned. And then maybe I'll create another copy of meat. So I choose the meat layer and I drag a copy, and I will change that to P25. Drop the size on that. Have it just a little bit bigger than the caption text, and we can keep everything aligned. All right, not too bad. And you could always change these things to your own preference. Maybe you like right alignment better. If we had right alignment, I'd bring everything over to REIT to be just like so. Page 25 gets moved over. And the dog champ text, I would click in there, select all, change my alignment to right alignment, and move everything over. And if you have all of the layers selected at the same time by holding the Shift key, you can move them all at the same time. And you just kind of have to see how are things going. Are they conflicting? Is it easy to read when you have any time you have text over any kind of background? So by choosing high contrast, that's certainly going to help things out. All right, and things remain legible. So this looks pretty good. Another principle is, look, I wanted to point out something called the Z reading pattern. So most of the time when we listen to songs, we read, we don't remember the third verse, but we remember the first and the last. And the same thing goes with print. So it's certainly important to have the title of your magazine up at the top. And I like to use 10 to 20% of the total space for headlines, for a title. Our first job as a designer is to get attention, all right? We can do that with two powerful properties. One is a large title that gets people interested in. If you have any interest in puppies and you see a magazine called Puppy, it gets your attention. So naming your titles are crucial, and whoever is in charge of writing the titles has a very important job to do. And then quite often your title should work with your feature image. If this was called Puppy Magazine and I had a picture of a sailboat here, there's incongruency. It doesn't make sense. The editor should say, no, if we're going to have a sailboat, on that sailboat has to be a puppy. Somewhere the image and the title has to always meet. Now this is called a subtitle, and this one's my largest one. And notice the location of where I put it. So I was talking about the Z reading pattern, and let me just, I'm going to create an ugly layer. You don't need to do this, but the Z reading pattern, and I'll pick a nasty color so it stands out. And we've got our big pencil tool. The Z pattern, people will read across, and they're going to read down, and then they read across again. So in this case, in this design, we have the title at the top, we have an image that helps us with getting people across the entire page. And we did that by pretty much using up the entire page with the image. And then, if the most important article in this magazine is Meet Chuck, this is a great place to put it. And not only that, but I made it really big. I might have other subtitles with other information, but if I do, they won't be this big. The reason why is I want to use contrast to get your attention to Meet Chuck on page 25. So I've got your attention with the magazine. I'm using your natural reading pattern so you're getting all the information you need to. And then I've got an important call to action so that you get into the magazine. All right? Very simple process, but keep this in mind as you're designing. All right? So I hope everyone can see this Z reading pattern, and now you understand why I did a lot of these things. I've got nice big title. I've got warm and cool, which is nice and attractive. It adds some pop to the whole thing. And then I use this high contrast color to draw your attention to an article within the magazine. All right, so everything here has had a purpose so far. I added a drop shadow, not just because I love drop shadows. All right, we don't just do drop shadows or do stuff because we want to. We add it because it helped contrast with the background. That's a good reason for doing that. And I repeated some things here. I have the same font and the same font, but then I added some contrast by bringing in a different font. And generally speaking, I like to use 2 to 3 different fonts for a design. I think if you have just one, it's not enough contrast. If you have more than 3, now things can start getting weird, all right? And it can get annoying to have too many fonts on a magazine. All right, so that's the Z reading pattern. And I can now come back and add more things. So I'll show you a couple other things that you can do to add some proximity. So for example, I'll add I'm going to add a line. I can use the rectangle tool. Now you don't have to do this, but there are other things you can do to add some proximity. So if I feel like everything's just kind of floating in space a little too much, maybe I'll take this rectangle tool and I'm going to draw a rectangle that somewhat helps me create a border box. Now I don't want, if I edit this, I can change this fill color to transparent and change the stroke color to white. And we'll go with a 3-point font on that rectangle, and it should be white. I think that looks good. And it sort of drops in the background. Now if I don't like, there are some places where I can convert this rectangle to rasterize. And then if there are places where I want to maybe erase part of that line, I can do that. And I'll just use the block tool. And maybe I don't want part of this to go too far into, have some spots where it doesn't go into the lettering. But this actually looks all right. So that would be another little principle that you could add if you just thought, I'm not really sure I like that too much. I'm not sure if I'd keep that. But maybe something like that helps with some more elements of proximity. If you thought this was just maybe a little too open, there are some things that can help pull and package everything together. And that could be a very simple thing. So you've got all of these things that work together to create it, to create your magazine item. I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to add a few more subtitles over here just to show you what else you can do for some ideas. Okay, I'm back and I've added a few more things to the magazine. You can see that I did more subtitles and again some more repetition, which makes it really nice. But this time I aligned left on this side. Here we have aligned right, so I've worked with alignment and repetition and contrast at the same time. Cleaned up my proximity. I took out a lot of this frame in the background. I'm still not totally sure if I like the frame in the background. Here's without, here's with it in. I'll leave it in. I think it's okay. It kind of helps wrap the whole thing together and keeps it from totally floating in space. And maybe that does even more to take your attention away from the clipping that I did. And so it ends up being more of a complete magazine. Added some other elements like this date, real simple, just put the text in. Now on this one I didn't put the drop shadow in. So you don't always have to keep drop shadow going. These I did have a drop shadow and I kept that drop shadow consistent with the drop shadow I had here. Yeah, I could that's maybe too much drop shadow. I could take that back a little bit, but I think you get the idea. So we got a good layout here. There's other things that we could do. If I wanted to add, I could do an earmark down here at the bottom. Maybe I take my polygon tool and I create a corner selection, and at the very top I add a new layer and I've chosen a green, and maybe I write some kind of promotion inside the magazine. You can see how that works. Maybe I put it there. Another place you see these little crop marks are top right corner. All right, I think you get the idea. It just depends how busy you want your magazine to be, and you'll have all sorts of instructions. In this case, we just have one image, but magazine covers get designed in all sorts of different ways. I'm actually not so crazy about this one because I'm not really liking how it cuts off the ear and even the letter Y. I'm not really sure I would ever do that. Down here, it seems like I've got some space, so if I wanted to do some kind of dog ear promotion, that might work. I still don't like how it covers the foot, but anyway, those are just some other ideas. I'm not going to keep that in there. Let's see here. Now there's one more tool that I want you to get used to. It's called the clone tool. And maybe you feel like you've done a lot already on this project, but so far we haven't even taken an hour yet. And we've gotten a whole magazine design done, but sometimes we need to use a clone tool to fix errors in the photo. Now this is a pretty good photo, but let's say the editor said, hey, we do purebreds only, and a purebred wouldn't have these spots on the nose. I don't know if that's actually true. I'm just totally making that up. So they're saying, great dog, we want to use the image, but take the spots out of the nose. So we have a clone tool, and the way the clone tool works, here it is, it looks like a rubber stamp, is the first thing you want to do is zoom in really close to where you're going to be doing all your fixing. And that's about the size of your clone tool. Right now mine is set at 7. I might go a little bit bigger, but not too much more. I'll type in 10 pixels, and that's about right. So the first thing you do is you use the option button to choose a target. This is what I'm going to clone, and you just click once, and then you move where you're going to do it. And it works kind of like a brush tool. It'll just gradually do it, and you can see that there's an X that shows where you're cloning. And quite often you have to keep reselecting. This is a process where you have to keep clicking a target and you just make little changes at a time. If you try to do too much, it's not going to quite work. And what's kind of nice is after you've chosen a target, before you start committing, it shows you what you're going to get. So I can start clicking these things. And this is just something you get practice with at time. I clone and fix a lot of photos. Photos will have scratches and dust. Sometimes I'll get ugly power lines in the background that just I don't need. Sometimes the editor is just going to say, hey, we need to fix that and take it out. Or I've done product images of bike riders, and they were using those images for a product promotion. And so I have to Photoshop out all of the logos because those logos are copyrighted and our product isn't necessarily endorsed by those companies. And so I go in and I do this cloning stuff. So there you go. Now this is all, it all is diligence. And as I zoom out to the quick naked eye, the spots have been taken out. Not too bad. Looks like I bumped my image. Let me fix that. I think not sure how or when I did that, but there we go. All right, that's better. And now I took the spots out of the nose. And there you go. That's the cloning tool. Make sure you're saving as you go. That's the in-class exercise. If you look at this, I think you could say, yeah, that could pass off as a magazine cover. And so we've learned how to use the clipping path to select an image, especially if you have a very complex background. Just using the magic wand tool or the quick selection tool could be frustrating and you might not get what you want. Your other option is on that French bulldog image is just to erase the background. That's always an option. It can take longer, or we can do a clipping path. So you have different ways to get the same thing done. It's never going to necessarily be you have to do it one way or the other. This is going to be something that you determine over time on your own. What you prefer or what works best for you. I just want to be able to show you another tool on the clipping path. We also learned the type tool, and there's another tool that we could show you really quick called a type on a path tool. So let's say I have this pen tool again. I can create a curved path. Maybe it looks like that. And then I can use my type tool and type on it. I'm going to copy playtime, come back to my type tool, and when I hover over, you'll see that the cursor changes to this little squiggly dotted line underneath it. That lets you know that you're going to type on the path. And then you get the cursor and you copy and paste your text. Now in this case I got too big a text. I got to drop the size down to, I'll go to 18. I can maybe go a little bigger. 24 is too big. Try 21. There we go. And now it's put it on a path. So that might be kind of a neat way to do something up here if you wanted to. And let's see, let's add the layer style of the drop shadow so it's consistent. All right, and then we put it up here. I can use the transform tool to get it a little bigger. Go ahead and commit that. And I can close my other playtime. And there you go. Now I'm not sure I like that or not. I mean, you could decide whether you want to keep it and you could rotate it a little bit more. But I think you get the idea, is that it lets you change things up in case everything on your page was a little too straight up and down, and this just lets you add a little fun to it. And it kind of works with this title, because we're playing with the title just a little bit. And maybe that's not such a bad departure that we're bothered by it. All right, but you do notice it. You still have things in a Z reading pattern, which is good. So that might be a fun way of typing on a path in Photoshop. Go ahead and hit save on that. And let's see, I think we've covered pretty much everything that we need for the assignment. And you're certainly welcome to reference this project for how we did it, but you're going to want your own magazine title and your own image. Some of them are provided for you. You'll be creating your own background. Most of everything you're doing for the assignment will be very similar to what we did in this exercise. And this whole project right here took just 1 hour. Not too bad. All right, well, good luck with your project, and I hope you enjoyed it.